We
So
can,
what I'm going to talk about is election protection on election day. Election protection is an organization that's really an organization of organizations that comes together for major elections and is a nationwide organization that includes a command center for each one of the jurisdictions, a legal intervention team, and on people who are trained to monitor at the level of the actual precincts. So that's how it's sort of set up, and in each state, varying organizations get together to be the on the ground organizations that participate in the election protection. So election protection covers a multitude of sins, but the critical thing about being a monitor on election day is that you have to absolutely maintain your nonpartisanship. So that means don't wear the T-shirt, don't wear the little bracelet, don't wear anything that you might wear anywhere else. But just this day, you have to everything that you present has to be nonpartisan. Sometimes the hardest thing is your car. You do not have to pull your bumper stickers off or anything like that, but just sort of park out of sight and then walk. And then you're clearly not going to cause any issues. So that's if once you've finished with the training, the Progressive Network will send out documentation. So there'll be a place for you to sign that you understand that you need to be nonpartisan. And then you also get some credentials, get access to name tags, and if you're really lucky, you'll get a T-shirt that you can wear during that day. But you don't have to have the T-shirt in order to work as an election protection monitor, so you don't have to worry about that. The purpose of election protection on the day of the election is to help voters vote, make sure that no voter is disenfranchised. And one of the good things that happens on election day too, through election protection, is data is collected. So information is collected about what is going on the ground. There will be an 800 number that anyone could call. They can call if they have questions. They can call if they have complaints. So one of the things you can do as an election monitor, if somebody asks you a question that you're not sure about the answer, just give them the number and say, call this number. And there are people at those command centers who are prepared to answer questions. And the people, they've got it set up in such a way that if a call comes in from South Carolina, it goes directly to a South Carolina group of people who are trained in the South Carolina laws. It's not just generic sort of stuff that's given out anywhere. And we also, as we collect the data, we're also hoping to deter fraud and irregularities, and also just things that people just inadvertently do wrong that cause problems. In the past, in South Carolina, what we found is that there's been some confusion about the rules. There have been some poorly trained poll workers, although I have to say that is a fairly rare occurrence in South Carolina. Sometimes we have people who just have done it for so long, they're going to do it the way they've always done it. But they're not necessarily malicious in their attitude. They're just sort of controlling. And sometimes it is helpful to be able to say to them, maybe you should look that one up in your poll manager's handbook, or I'm not sure about that, but you don't want to argue with them. We still do have, in particular parts of the state, we have problems with long lines. And with just not enough poll workers to handle all the duties that they need at any particular place. We still have problems with access for disabled people. And sometimes things are just poorly administered. As I said, that there are three main issues that we run into: is lack of enough voting machines. Although we've had less problem with that since they switched to the paper ballot scanning. We had more problems with the older machines that were really clunky and hard to set up. And oftentimes they just didn't deliver enough. So it was a human capital sort of problem, but we have less of a problem with that with the new machines. And again, the inadequate access for people with disabilities, and we continue to have some confusion over the particular logistics of the photo ID. You're doing is you're being eyes and ears. You are not the police. So you're not the person confronting or telling people what they're doing is wrong. You are watching and reporting. And if there is something that you see that is wrong, you can call the 800 number yourself. And generally speaking, there will be local hubs that you can also call. You know, Brett will probably be somewhere you could get in touch with him. And so they're intermediaries who could run it up the chain if it's a serious problem. But you're not the person who wants to take that on. You want to report what you see, get good information, perhaps take pictures. But you're not the person confronting folks. You're really interested in making sure that this process is working. And you want to be a resource both to the voters and to the poll workers. As I said, one of the problems that they have at the polls is just not having enough poll workers. And one of the classic problems is that someone will come and want to vote curbside. So they'll want to vote in their car. But there's nobody working the polls who sees that they're there. Somebody has to respond to them in order for that to be successful. There's nothing wrong with you as a volunteer going in and letting them know you've got people out here who are ready to vote, and I know you don't have anybody who can be out here all the time, but I'm letting you know that they're here. So that kind of reporting in can be very helpful. Another classic sort of thing that we have, and I'll talk a little bit more about this during when we talk about photo ID, is that sometimes we have people who just want to run a really efficient polling place, and they put somebody at the doorway to the polling place who's inquiring of people as they come in is, do you have your driver's license or do you have your ID? And really implying that if you don't have your ID, you shouldn't come through the door. That is completely wrong. If you are a registered voter, you can vote a provisional ballot, whether you've got an ID or not, whether you've ever had one of those IDs. But so sometimes when they set it up like that, that's again something you might go in and mention to the manager, that the script that person is using is discouraging to the voters. The voters should be, the only question should be, are you a registered voter, not where's your ID? It's under if people do have the ID because of the way that they're using computer sort of check-in, you know, they can read the barcodes. So that in fact, if people do have their driver's license or IDs and they have them out, it makes stuff move quicker. But there are ways to mention that get it out if you have it, without discouraging the people who do not have it. So who should not be at the polling place? The candidate, somebody who's actually running themselves, can be there and can come in, can kiss babies, shake hands, but they can't hand out literature or do anything beyond just sort of introducing themselves and interacting with they can't intimidate, they can't disrupt. But nobody representing them can come in and do those sorts of things. The representatives are not allowed to do that. There should be no campaigning within 50 feet of the voting area. Anybody, including you, should not be there intimidating a voter. Nobody's intimidating the voters.
500 feet, 500 feet, 500 feet, Susan, from the poll.
Yeah. But no person should be intimidating. And if you have a question about whether somebody's intimidating, again, you can report that to the poll manager and say, I'm not really sure, but I can't figure out what this person is doing. They're really engaging with the voters, and you're just asking people where they work, or, you know, who are you married to, or things that may not be anything other than conversation, but they can come across to a person as being very intimidating. And there shouldn't be any law enforcement there unless they're there to vote. The places where we've had the most problems with the police officers are when the voting precinct is at a school, and schools often have school resource officers who act like these places, you know, they act like this is their home. And they're used to being anywhere and doing whatever they want to at their school. And they just don't get that they're law enforcement. They don't get that this restriction applies to them. Again, you're not the person to confront the school resource officer, but you may need to tell the poll manager that the school resource officer doesn't still really understand he's not to be engaged in, he's not to be engaged with the voters at all, and should not be where he's visible to the voting area. The poll managers are supposed to accommodate people with disabilities, or anybody like Brett and me who are over 65. They're supposed to accommodate those people at the voting precinct. What accommodation means can be a wide variety of things. The curbside access is one of the most used accommodations. And again, once the polling, they actually take the machines out to the cars, but that takes people. And so it slows things down, and is often, it's often a little bit problematic, and people can get kind of annoyed. But if you can help people be cheerful about the fact that it's important for the people with disabilities to be able to fully participate in their civic obligation. Sometimes the curbside voting signs are just where nobody could see them. Again, that's one of the things, if you think the signage is in places where it just doesn't really make any sense, you can mention that to the poll managers, but don't go and fix the signs yourself. That would kind of get you in hot water, probably. One of the other things with disabled voters is you have some people who are on walkers or on wheelchairs who don't want to vote in their car. They want to vote on the machine. They want to go in and vote. They want to wait in line and vote, but it's really very uncomfortable for them to wait in line, or really physically hard for them. It's often the way that poll managers deal with that kind of a situation is to allow that person to come and sit down close to where they check in, and have somebody sort of hold their space in line. So when their point in line gets to the front, then they can join where they had been to begin with. Other times you'll have a poll manager who'll just take someone with a disability straight to the front of the line. That's the poll manager's prerogative to do those things, but they are obligated to accommodate as best they can. And you sometimes have people who have disabilities that are such that they need help with the voting, and they are allowed to have help and ask for the help. But if it's somebody who's working the polls that helps them, there really should be two people there, not just one. And it's not supposed to be an employer. It's not supposed to be anybody who would be in a position to have power over the person who's voting. Okay, voter ID is it's still new enough that it causes issues, and the Election Commission has tried to create documents that make it clear to people that these are the IDs that are accepted as IDs, and this is what a reasonable exception is, so that if you do not have an ID, you can still vote as long as you sign a document indicating what your reasonable exception is. It's a little hard to communicate all of that in written things that don't end up being somewhat misleading. So that you need a photo ID is true, except that you don't have to have a photo ID. So it's a little bit hard for them to communicate, so that people are often quite confused. These are the IDs that are accepted, which is the driver's license, which has to be up to date. And if you have a driver's license that's expired, or even a non-driver's license DMV that is expired, those are not good. They have to be up to date. A U.S. passport or a passport card, they have both of those now. A U.S. military, a voter registration card issued by the county. When you register to vote, you can get a picture on that registration card. That's actually one of the easiest ones to get, because you don't have to have any documentation other than what you would need to have to register. So that's an option for some people who have problems with paperwork and that sort of thing. You can also, now they've added your gun, whatever, I don't even know what they call it.
Concealed weapon permit.
Yeah,
which
concealed
we don't
weapon
even need
permit.
one now, but they're still taking the gun thing as some kind of badge of courage of a voter.
So, but that is also acceptable. If anybody who doesn't have one of those can still vote. They vote a provisional ballot, so they don't get to vote on the machine, but they do get to vote. And but they also sign, it's called an affidavit. It's really a witness statement indicating why it is they don't have an ID. They may don't have an ID because they don't have a driver's license anymore because they don't drive, and they live in a facility where they don't need the driver's license, and they haven't had any reason to get one of the other ones. Some people don't have IDs because they don't have a birth certificate. Sometimes people have not been able to get IDs because there's confusion with a divorce document or a name change document. There are all kinds of reasons. Sometimes they just haven't had the money to get what they needed to do it. They haven't had the transportation, or there've been a change in their life that made it so they haven't been able to get to the place to make the changes. All of those things are reasonable impediments, and they don't have to, the reasonableness is really not something that's questioned in the certification process. The only thing that could be questioned in the certification process is whether the person was telling the truth. For instance, if somebody came in and somebody drove themselves to the poll in a Cadillac and then came in and said they didn't have any transportation, and somebody saw that might be something that was questioned. But I have to say, I've been to many a certification hearing, and I think Bill Brett has, and we've sent volunteers to do it. And I've never run into any situation where the factualness of the reasonable impediment has been questioned. So generally speaking, I'd have to say that the system has done a good job of assuring that people who don't have photo IDs their votes are able to count. The quirky little thing here is the people whose votes are not being counted are not the people who don't have IDs, but the people who forget to bring them. So they they wait in line, they get up there and they realize, oh, I left my driver's license back in my purse at home. Or they thought they had they really just don't know where their driver's license is. They know they have one, but there they are trying to vote with it and they don't have it. And sometimes you'll have a poll manager who hears that story from a voter and thinks that that's a reasonable impediment. And they'll have that person write out an affidavit as if it were a reasonable impediment, saying something like, left my purse at home. Left my purse at home is not a reasonable impediment to having an ID at all. So that's what that purpose is for, the people who simply do not have the IDs. If you've got an ID, can't find it, don't know where it is, you can still vote a provisional ballot. You do not sign an affidavit, and you have to present yourself at the election board of your county between the time of the election and the certification and show them your ID, or your vote will not count. And that process is not really being explained to people, and people are not showing up. And I've seen quite a bit of disenfranchisement for that reason, because people think they did everything that they needed to do, but they didn't. So if you don't have, if you have an ID, but you don't have it with you at the polling place, you have a duty to show up at the certification office and show it to them in order for your vote to count. There is sort of a way out here, because sometimes people will go home, find their driver's license, and then realize, oh, the driver's license is out of date. I didn't realize mine had expired, you know, or they'll remember that why they don't have the driver's license is it fell into a part of the car that they can't get it out of. Or there may be some reason where they just can't get to their driver's license in between when they didn't show up at the election and the certification. Those people can actually go to their county election board and get a South Carolina voter registration card with a picture on it. You get those right when you present for them. Once they've got that, then they can present that as their identification, and their vote will count. But it's a bit of a confusing process. Occasionally, you'll have somebody who who presents their photo ID to the poll worker who's checking people in, and the poll worker is going to look at the ID and look at the person that doesn't look like you. You know, you're not. This does not look like the same person, and that's sort of a problem. You know, you can have a driver's license for a long time. You can have the. Excuse me a second. Let me stop that. So you can have all kinds of problems with that. You know, and people change their appearance. You know, they go from blonde to brunette. You know, they get this crazy LASIK, no longer wear their glasses. You know, there are all kinds of things that radically change people's appearance. And the identification, you know, of your signature could also be looked at if it's a document that has a signature. And again, people's signatures change over time. Technically, the poll workers are supposed to err on the side of the voter. But sometimes they just don't feel comfortable doing that. They just don't think it's right. Sometimes they'll ask for another form of photo ID. And when you're presenting a secondary ID, it doesn't have to be one of them that's acceptable for the primary. So your Costco card can work as a secondary ID, your employment, a card issued by your employer, a school ID card, a college ID cards, all of those things are still possible. But the bottom line is if somebody's identity is questioned, that person should be able to vote a provisional ballot. They should not be sent away without being able to vote. There are also problems with addresses being different. Hang on just a second. I'm sorry. This is somebody with the event I'm doing tonight. I've got to answer it. Hello? Hello? Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay. So there's often there's a discrepancy between the address and the, whoa, what happened now? What happened there?
The address you use to identify yourself is not
Yeah,
necessarily
no,
the
I
address
just lost my screen share was what my problem was. You know, like the address on the driver's license would not match the address that they have for you in the voting records. The question to the person is, what is your current address? And if the current address is the voting address, then there's no problem. It doesn't matter. The photo ID is to prove your identity, not to prove your address. And so that should not be an issue. But again, if it becomes an issue, they should be able to vote. Every once in a while, you will have somebody who challenges the votes. And Brett, did I lose you? Okay. every once in a while, you'll have somebody who challenges a vote. And if the vote is challenged, again, the challenged vote has to be done by the provisional ballot. And at the certification hearing, if the challenger does not show up, then that vote is counted. The real problem with challenges is that challenges sometimes can be done kind of systematically, which can be intimidating and can also just slow down everything.
That anybody, according to the law, can challenge the legitimacy of a voter in line to vote. And that has been, we've seen in the past, a problem, and it happened to be a problem at precincts that were majority black. It's happened at Benedict College, at Morris College in Sumter, and at Aiken Tech. And that the problem with that, other than the fact that it sometimes is just an attempt to throw nails in the road, so to speak, is that if someone does it over and over again, that challenged person has to, the poll manager gets involved and then has to decide whether that person can vote or not. And it would be something like, this person doesn't live in the precinct, this person, et cetera, makes up something that the poll manager would have to find and like pull that person out of the line. And it can tie the line up. And we've seen instances in these minority precincts where there were people that were doing it over and over again. And the problem comes when the poll manager doesn't decide, well, this is too much, you're taking too much time, we're going to move on. And so it's a subjective call on the part of the poll manager as to how long to let that go on. And so if that's happening, that's clearly something that you need to call the 866 R vote number. And my number, if you're credentialed, my number will be on the things that you get for the credentials. And I'm in direct contact with the state election commission and can contact the county election commissions, because there needs to be an intervention, probably by someone that runs the election system, to be able to get that poll manager to grow a backbone and tell whoever is doing that over and over again, they can't do that, because it'll slow their intent is to slow the line down. People get tired of waiting and they leave. And so here's Susan again.
Yeah, sorry, I had to let in the Yale Whiffenpoofs are singing at my church tonight, and they're half an hour early, but it's all right, I let them in. And so Brett has talked to you about how the challenges can sometimes be problematic. If it does seem to be, systemically targeting particular people, be sure to, phone that in, make sure somebody knows about it. Don't try and stop it yourself. But it's an important thing to notice. And one thing that we're concerned about in terms of this election is that those kinds of challenges may be made challenging people's citizenship. I don't think this person is a citizen, shouldn't be able to vote. And that could be obviously a challenge made based upon somebody's last name, based upon the color of their skin, maybe based upon where they live, because they might live in a trailer park where a lot of people who recently immigrated live. There are all kinds of ways that you could stereotype people and use that kind of a challenge. And again, that would be something to be very concerned about and to watch for. And given the current climate, that may be something that could happen in certain parts of South Carolina. So on the day of the election, do go in and introduce yourself to the poll worker. You can ask for the manager, but it doesn't have to be the manager, just so that somebody knows. Make it clear you're a nonpartisan observer, monitor. You are not a partisan poll watcher. And sometimes these people just cannot understand the difference. There are particular requirements for somebody who's there watching on behalf of a particular candidate that have to be met. There's certain kinds of credentials that, where they live, where they're registered to vote, that sort of thing, that don't apply to you at all. You do not have to have a piece of paper from a candidate saying this person is there watching for me, because you're not there watching for any candidate. But this is, and I hate to, you hate to you pick on older people, especially when you are one. But this often tends to be a problem with somebody who's been working the polls forever and ever. And they know how they're going to run, and they just don't understand they haven't understood what election protection as a whole thing is, or they don't understand why anybody would be there who didn't have a dog in the fight, who instead whose dog was the entire fight. But there is now in the appendix of the poll watchers handbook, there's a clear chart that sets out the differences between a monitor, an observer, and a poll watcher who's there for a candidate. So if you've got somebody who's like trying to kick you out, you could say, maybe you should look at do it nicely, but maybe you should look at the appendix, which will explain what an observer is and that I'm not an observer. In the toolkit that you'll get from the Progressive Network, you will have a certification that says who you are and that you're there with the election protection. So if they want to see something, they'll have something to see. But when you're a poll watcher, you actually have a document that you give to the poll managers, and they keep them. Your certification, they don't get to keep. If they want to see it, they can see it, but they give it right back to you. Don't let them keep your documentation. If you happen to know you're going to a precinct where somebody who's kind of dyed in the wool is running the place, we'll make a copy. So you got a couple of them if somebody takes them. But usually that has not been a problem. It's good to make eye contact with folks, both the workers and the voters. And as I said, do feel free to spot issues and take notes and call. And it may be you spot something you're not sure whether it's important or not. Don't worry about seeming silly and calling in something that ends up being not important. It's hard to know at the time, in real time. And if it's something that doesn't feel right to you, doesn't smell right, it's worth going ahead and calling it in anyway. So again, don't engage in any partisan conversation. Don't escalate anything. And if a poll worker tells you to leave. Now that I would say the caveat, if they're telling you to leave because they're treating you as a partisan poll, you should at least ask them, to look in the appendix. But otherwise, if they tell you to leave. And don't, obviously you don't want to present yourself as a lawyer or a law student if you're not. If you are, and somebody asks you, it's okay to let them know, but you can let them know, I'm not here as a lawyer or as a law student. I'm here as a trained volunteer. And it may be that you go to one precinct after another, and really things are going pretty well. And actually, the way elections are run in South Carolina is much better than many places in this country, because it's run statewide. It's run by a bipartisan, independent commission. It's not run by elected officials. So it's not the Republican Attorney General who's running the election, as it is in many other places, or even the Democratic Attorney General or Secretary of State. It's different ways in different places, but we really often find that the only problems are ones of miscommunication or of inadvertent mistakes, or as I said before, just not having enough people to do everything that you're trying to do. But don't be frustrated on election day if that happens. Your presence will have been important and may have made a difference, even if you don't see that difference. Just people knowing that that somebody cares about their ability to vote is an important thing. And there's the number. You'll have on your name tags, and you'll get this number over and over again, the hotline. And you can share the hotline. Will be, I don't think it's open yet, but it will be open before Election Day. And so it's one of those things where you can share this number with anybody. You can share it with folks in your church. You can share it with your neighborhood association. You can put it on the front door of your house. You can put it on a bumper sticker. It's and particularly if you run into somebody who's who's got questions, but also seems to be suspicious. You know, they if you get the sense that they wouldn't believe you if you told them. Sometimes giving them a number where they can call and talk to somebody is, if for some reason, more trustworthy. So if you run into situations like that, do feel free to use the number. And so we really appreciate your interest in this. And elections, even though they're not perfect, and Brett will explain definitely why they're not perfect, but they're still important and critical as we move forward in this arc of justice, we think.
And that this is what you'll get. Here's the code of conduct that says that you will not be obnoxious. You'll not do anything that casts aspersions upon the Lawyers Committee. Let me tell you, the National Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under the Law was started at the behest of John F. Kennedy in 1963. Before he was killed, he knew that the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that he had been working on, was going to be very difficult to pass and enforce in the South. As we still know that it is. He was right. And that, so he spoke at the National American Bar Association convention that year and encouraged them to start a pro bono, which means for free, civil rights advice group to help ensure that people's voting rights are established and kept. And that it was ran rather silently for many, many years. It started actually in '65, and they were doing just legal interventions, good stuff. And since we've been involved since it started in 2008, every election since 2008 now, the Progressive Network has monitored these incoming calls, and I'll speak to that in a minute. But the idea of the nationwide hotline is something that's reasonably new for people to be able to understand that there are those that aren't the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, or working for a candidate that are simply concerned about everybody's access. And now we have, over the 16 years we've been doing this, had developed working relationships with the Election Commission, the State Election Commission, and the boards of elections, the BOEs, each county. Each county has a board of elections that is appointed by the legislative delegation. And in our little short course that follows this on democracy, I'm going to scroll through something, and you'll see the different nature of the legislative delegations. Like one county may be very Republican, one county may be Democratic, but that delegation gets to appoint who's running the office in that county. So there have been different personalities, but over the 16 years, the differences in application of the statutes we've seen be consistent. We had some problems 16 years ago, and that we haven't had any systemic problems that didn't pop up that we couldn't deal with. I'll give you an example of the value of our audit after the election. The value of what we're doing is helping confused voters vote. That's it. That's 98% of the phone calls. We'll get over 1,000 phone calls on election day. We get 1,300 in 12 hours on a presidential election. And the hotline goes hot when the early voting centers open in South Carolina in October 21. And so people can call in, and the importance of calling in is establishing this database that we can review after the election. And so we will watch, the people that are certified to be inside the back end, they call it, of the election protection hotline. The calls go into a call center that's a big law firm who are volunteer lawyers who studied the law book of South Carolina, answer most questions, 90-something% of the questions. We can see that coming in real time, and we'll monitor it, and there'll be one that says it's resolved, and one says escalate, which means that I can pick up the phone, or somebody else that's monitoring this can pick up the phone and call the voter that called in, and literally within a couple of minutes after they've called in, be talking to a voter in line somewhere that we're able to help them navigate something to be able to at least vote provisional and to understand that how the certification hearing works. And so when you're trained, we want you to wade into that and to go to the certification hearings, which are all on Friday after a general election in the county election office. And that if you sign up to participate, you have to sign this code of conduct. And that we will then send you your credentials. Here's some advice for field guide. Here's some links for some good things to do, good things to help. And that this is the letter that, see, dear poll managers, this letter will go to the county that you're in. And that, so we're recognizing, we're getting the county director of the election board in that county to recognize us and you. You have a copy of this that'll be filled out that you can carry. Susan referenced your credential to show people. And you can either be with the NAACP or with Progressive Network. Either group can sign this. We will not send you this whole sheet of things. What we will do is we'll fill one of these out with your name on it and put it in a badge and mail it to you, which means we're going to need your mailing address, but we have your email address, and we want you to put in the chat when this is over with, if you want to go through this process and get the t-shirt and be bound to all the codes of conduct. You'll get your badge and your t-shirt.